A disturbing trend at several Massachusetts schools has led to a reckoning among students and school administrators. In Danvers, the high school suspended all wrestling activities yesterday after an investigation found members of the team used hateful and biased language and referenced hazing in group chats. The suspension comes just over a month after the public learned of racist and violent locker room rituals members of the Danvers hockey team participated in last year. Incidents officials had tried to keep quiet. And a few weeks back, 300 students walked out of Braintree High School voicing complaints of unaddressed racism in the school after an online video showed a student using racist language. A few days before that, students at Quincy High School staged a demonstration which was prompted by at least 2 incidents involving hate speech. In one, a student repeatedly used the N-word and glorified the enslavement of African Americans on video, which led to a physical altercation between 2 students in the school. And students and parents have argued the administration has not done enough to address the issues.
It was atrocious. I was actually fuming. All of these problems have just been piling up and up.
The hate in the school is such a problem that has not been addressed.
At Quincy High, we've been having a problem where administration does not take accountability for the incidents that are happening in our school.
They don't need to just say, I hear you, I hear you. They need to put efforts in place to really show that they are hearing these kids.
Joining me are Maya Correia, a 2017 Quincy High School graduate and co-founder of the school's People of Color Student Union, and James Ikeda, a teacher at Quincy High School and a founding faculty advisor of the school's People of Color Student Union. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Maya, I want to start with you. Can you talk to me what your reaction was as someone who is, now out of the high school system and into adulthood, what your reaction was when you saw the incidents that were happening and the reaction that students and the administration had to them?
I was honestly very surprised, not necessarily by the videos themselves, because I refused to watch them, but from the student reaction. We didn't have that much reaction last time, given it didn't have as much stamina as it did. Obviously, we had our little small, very still purposeful little gatherings, but I've never seen it to this extent, as well as feeling like there's actually going to be something that's done about it.
What do you think changed in that, Maya? Because my take on this, having remembered being in high school, is terrible things happen and sometimes students don't react for a number of reasons. We'll talk about the administration in a minute, but what do you think has given the students the courage and the inspiration to confront these issues head on?
I definitely feel like social media has given power to these kids. There's a lot more learning that is being done on social media, and there's a lot more access. When back then, I was just really angry and I would just say whatever I felt, but not necessarily knowing the verbiage and having the vocabulary to be able to discuss these things and actually understand what's going on, So I think with social media, they're becoming more aware that this is not just something that is exclusive to them. It's a problem that is pervasive among education.
James, Maya obviously hits the nail on the head, and of course these are long-term problems that have been happening for centuries, unfortunately and sadly and tragically, yet at the same time there does seem to be something of a tide turning. We still don't have many men of color who are teaching in our public school systems. We don't have very many people of color who are teaching majority, minority school systems. What's your experience? What are you hearing from the students about their reaction to this and what they're hoping will change?
Well, for one thing, I think one of the people in that clip really gets it right, which is that it's not so much just about hearing students. I would say the distinction is between hearing students and students having power. And I think students are acutely aware of the fact that they don't have power. They're acutely aware of the fact that they relate to this institution in a way where they feel sort of dictated to, where if they have negative experiences, there's not a place for them to go always. Their complaints don't always have a home, as it were. So I think what we're seeing at this point is a combination of students sort of finding their power, finding a way to get into the room, a way to, I suppose, get the ear of people who have policymaking ability. But what the gap that I'm still waiting to see closed is between consultation and democratization, right? Between students just sort of, you get a group of students together and you say, this is now the sort of representative group of students, and we'll ask you questions and we'll get approval for measures or whatever it is. We'll brainstorm a little bit, and then that will stand in as, sort of student opinions being heard, as student ideas being heard, as student experiences being respected. I think there's a difference between that and the next level of students, and frankly, faculty and staff as well, just having more policymaking power, having more
actually
power in the school.
Making change and not just having conversation. I want to look at an Instagram post from an Instagram page called Black at Quincy High. The poster writes, "I'm a mother of 2 boys and the things I've heard from them are ridiculous. Teachers threatening them to take off their do-rags, asking them to look them in the eye to make sure they weren't high, and even stopping them in the halls to ask them to take their headphones off when countless other students in the halls are wearing headphones." Tagley Jerry sent an email out to everyone, but that did nothing. Maya, I want to ask you about this, because one of the differences and one of the changes, I think, is that we now have research and evidence that shows that there is a bias on how teachers treat students of color, that they are treated differently than white students are. And I'm just wondering if it's what your reaction is to seeing that some of these things are still happening in the school system and in your school system, your alma mater, and also what you hope teachers and administrators will learn from this.
I'm definitely not surprised, and I don't see it not being a problem. Like, still not, well, let me rephrase that. I don't see it not, like, the issue of it being reduced anytime soon, just because it is a process. But the adultification of especially Black children is, there have been countless studies on it. Black children are just seen as elder, and they're seen as more aggressive and loud. And their actions are mostly misinterpreted. And that's just, I feel like, is based on cultural difference and not taking the time to understand their circumstances, the communities in which they're serving, the circumstances in which they may be faced with at home, they're not being addressed. So if there is an issue with a student in which, they may have this issue, it needs to be dealt with in a way that's more personable than disciplinary, because, the school to prison pipeline is very real. And the way in which we discipline kids in schools can place them in a place where they are wanting to rebel against teachers that are supposed to be guiding them into society, or to actually being productive members of society where they can serve their communities in a way in which they should be served.
Yeah, James, I want to work off Maya's point there, because I'm a big proponent of we should treat children like children and teens like teens and young adults like young adults based on their developmental capabilities. And as awful and as terrible as some of these things that we've seen reported are, they're still children and still teens. And the responsibility for guiding them and helping them along the way is on the parents and the adults and the administrators in their life. And I'm wondering if this developmental science and this accountability is something that is a thread that informs everything that administrators and teachers are doing when dealing with these terrible issues of overt racism and that sort of violence within the school population.
I think perhaps not a thread going back all too far, but I think now for sure, because there's been a lot of talk in the school about restorative justice practices. And I think there's an understanding at this point that, if there's 2 demands that students have made over the years, it's been diversify the faculty and have some kind of system in place for dealing with racist incidents in the school. And in the case of the latter, for many years, students have advocated for some kind of non-punitive, perhaps like peer mediation-based system, based on, just understanding that having a merely punitive system is not going to solve the problem. So that's been a big, restorative justice and restorative justice techniques have been a big part of the discussion at the school now. And I think actually that that's been out in front in this most recent series of incidents, which is something I'm really happy to see. And that's a difference from last time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think they're steps forward. But the caution also is, as Mr. Ikeda, as I know you've called him, would caution is trying to actually get the action done and not so much talk. Do you have any advice, to teachers and administration about how to include the feedback of the students, and also the warning that having the children and teenagers who are most harmed by the racism and by the actions having to carry the burden of doing the educating of their peers, which is also an additional burden that I think folks don't really recognize?
My main one would just be to not be quick to get defensive. I know we always want to defend ourselves when you feel that you have done nothing wrong, but listening to the students and genuinely making the effort to understand really better helps their overall experiences in school. I'm a firm believer that as long as an educator sets a fruitful foundation in the classroom so that the environment feels safe for the kids, that you will have greater results. And that just serves as on a general basis. So I want them to be less defensive, listen more, and self-reflect on those things and their practices and their curriculum. What are they teaching? How are they teaching it? What are the vocabulary that they use? It's simple things just like vocabulary changes that helps tweak the way in which you think about certain things. Yeah.
It's also interesting. Social media is also part of the problem, but also part of the solution. So maybe paying more attention to how we're using that and using it for good rather than evil, I think, which is a good way to start 2022. Maya, Correia, James, Ikeda, thank you so much for joining me. Happy holidays to both of you, and I appreciate your expertise in joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking.